Okay, good morning again, everyone. Today, I was asked on Instagram, I think one of the reels or something we had, someone commented and they said, hey, could you talk about anger? And so I was like, okay. So I can talk about anger today. The Buddha said that the antithesis of anger is loving kindness. So there you go. I'm just kidding. I'll tell you a bit more. So the reason why I had us do meditation this morning was, one, I think it's nice. You know, it's nice to incorporate, and I had done that for a different service, and they're like, oh, we should do that more. Not every time, but, you know, more sometimes. So I was like, okay, we can do that. And it was a good opportunity for us to do it because it's very easy for the Buddha or anyone to tell us, like, oh yeah, if you want to stop being angry, just be nice. Like, just do that, and that's totally fine. But it's a lot harder in practice to do something like that, right? If you're angry with someone, that's like the last thing you're thinking about doing. And so it's important for us to break down what is happening with us when we get angry. So one of the great strengths of the Buddha and the Buddhist teachings is breaking down things into different components. So this gets down to a point where it almost becomes kind of like too difficult. But to put it very simply, in anger, there's two things, or at least two aspects of it that are happening. So one of them is physical, and one of them is mental. So when we get angry, there is an actual physical response that gets triggered within us, right? So you can call it stress or our sympathetic nervous system, whatever it is. What's important for us is that we understand that something is happening to our body. And so it's important for us to do something about that aspect of it. And meditation is one way to do it, right? One way we can recognize our body is if we get very attuned to our body. So if we're doing meditation when we're not angry, when we're in a very calm and reserved and a very controlled environment, we can start to understand how our body's feeling in that state. And then we can see how it's different when we're in a more nervous or anxious or stressful state. So that's one step that we can start going towards. And then when we do actually get angry, we can kind of use it as a reference point, someplace that we can go back to when we're getting upset, when we feel that change in our body, you know, when our heart starts beating, or, you know, a lot of people say that your blood boils, or maybe you can feel like the vein in your head popping out or something. When you start to feel these aspects of anger, then we know, like, okay, something's happening with our body and we have to change it. So the reason why we have to change it, though, is because of the mental aspect. So when our physical body changes, it is, of course, connected to our mind and how we think. And when we get angry, the way we think changes. So we become much more tunnel visioned, focusing on, you know, very specific details. And it's harder for us to really understand the situation. And ultimately, Buddhism is about stepping back from everything, really, trying to look at the bigger picture of stuff. We're so used to clinging on to our very narrow-minded, selfish view, but if we're able to step back, then we can realize the truth of the world around us, and it helps us to live a much happier and less suffering life. So this, of course, also applies to when we get upset, when we get angry, and if we can step back, first, you know, realizing that with anger comes this response in our body, which comes this change in our mind, and we aren't in the best way to think about the situation. We can step back and understand that we can go about it in a more skillful way. So after we can calm down for a little bit, right? There are different ways for us to calm down, whether it's breathing, counting, even just, you know, removing ourselves from the situation, trying to find some way to calm down. Then we can work on our understanding of it, our mental capacity, our view of what is happening. So the Buddha gave different ways to understand kind of this, you know, toolbox to help us step back and realize the situation, to get rid of this anger. So one of the ways that the Buddha taught was to look at the karma, or rather the progression of cause and effect that would happen if we were to act on our anger, to do something that you know, hurts or maybe you know, makes someone else upset. So if someone does something to hurt us or make us unhappy, and we are to retaliate in some way, you know, we feel justified in the sense that we should be able to do that to them, we end up in this endless cycle of, you hurt me, then I hurt you, then you hurt me back, and then I hurt you back, and it won't ever stop ending until one of us eventually passes away. And to get kind of like morbid about it, then it goes to like the children, and the children start fighting. So that's not something that any of us want, right? And we want to break that cycle. So when we're able to step back and realize that if we were to act on our anger, that there are these consequences, and these consequences are not something that we want, that helps us to separate from that anger and maybe do a better job at living with it. This is, of course, not to say that we're supposed to be doormats or turn our face away from injustices, but rather to look at it in a skillful way. So if we can step back, understand the consequences of certain actions, we can start to find the consequences of maybe more skillful things, how we can break that cycle, that it is important that even though we're upset, to try to work in a way that will allow both parties to come to an understanding. This can be, of course, very difficult, but allowing us to step away from that anger makes it much easier. An interesting one that I thought was interesting, I guess that's redundant, one that was interesting to me was that when we are upset, we're actually acting in a way that they use the word enemies, but I guess people who don't really like us, frenemies, whatever, people who would like to see us not do so well, we act in a way that they would appreciate, that makes them happy. So an enemy likes to see you ugly, and when you're angry, you're ugly. An enemy would like to see you destroy your friendships, and many times under the power of anger, you destroy your friendships. An enemy would like to see you go and act in ways against your own advantage, and many times when you're angry, you get things mixed up. The way that looks that would be good for you, it turns out it's not, and vice versa. So this is another way of putting this kind of context or stepping back and realizing that if we act in a way that we're angry, the person who is making us angry would probably get even happier because it's acting in a way that is not beneficial to ourselves. And so this is another way of stepping back, of separating, realizing like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't act on my anger because that's just giving the other person what they want. So those are two ways that we can step back from anger and try to understand that if we are to act on these emotions, that it will end up being not very good for us. Now, this is not to say that we should ever stop being angry. I think that is a trap that a lot of us fall into where we tell ourselves, oh yeah, just don't be angry, then you don't have to worry about it. But being angry is a natural response for all of us as human beings. So as Jodo Shinshu Buddhists, we realize that we never rid ourselves of the three poisons, which are greed, anger, and ignorance. So these three things, until we pass away, they will always be a part of us. And so instead of trying to get rid of them, trying to uproot them, rather learning how to live with them. So this is our Jodo Shinshu practice, is realizing in this imperfect body, in this imperfect world, if we live in a way that we inevitably will end up being selfish, or we're going to get angry, that we're going to be upset with people. How do we work on it? How do we see that, realize it, separate ourselves from it, and then eventually move on to a better way? And this is, I think, what is the most helpful about Jodo Shinshu, is that instead of trying to get rid of any kind of our emotions or any kind of passions, realizing and accepting that it is a part of who we are, and then in doing so, we can better accept it. Just like in the meditation, where instead of trying to get rid of your thoughts or destroy them, understanding that our thoughts come and go, and then if we're able to just let them come and go, it's much easier to let them just pass by rather than hanging on tight to them and then they never go away.